Caroline, and I want to start off by, a heartfelt congratulations to my honourable friend, the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh West, and wonderful to see another member taking this cause up so passionately and pay tribute, particularly to Richard and Nazanin, because without the dignified way that they raised their voices, it would not have got the attention of all of us across this House. But also to say that it should not be about he or she who shouts the loudest that gets the most attention. And I think that when I spoke with Richard during the time when my team and I wrote our report through the All-Party Parliamentary Group on consular assistance and deaths abroad that I chair, he recognised that himself, as did many families who gave evidence to us. So I commend the bill that the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh West has brought forward. I think I agree with everything in it. It's not a criticism, it's a desire to see it go further. I would like to see it further expanded upon, and I'll tell members why shortly. But on the inside page of our passports, it says, and I appreciate mine might be slightly out of date for obvious reasons, but Her Britannic Majesty's Secretary of State requests and requires in the name of Her Majesty all those whom it may concern to allow the bearer to pass freely without let or hindrance and to afford the bearer such assistance and protection as may be necessary. Such protection as may be necessary is what it says on our British passports, and it's what I think our citizens rightly would expect that they get being British citizens, whether they are singularly British citizens or they are dual nationals. And that's the point at which I think we all need to start from, because the general public do have a reasonable expectation that the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office will help us. They will help our family members if we are killed, if we die, or if we get into trouble or something goes wrong when we are abroad. And that the level of service that we will get will be akin to that we would get if we got into trouble here in our own country. And my comments come from some personal experience. Having worked for the American State Department in a consulate as a local staffer for a couple of years before I came to this place, I saw firsthand the level of assistance afforded by the American state, and there is a lot that we can criticise America for, but their consular assistance is not one of them. And I saw firsthand how, when a family had lost a loved one in Scotland, they were an American citizen, how the Consul General, who was my boss, phoned the family up personally, spoke to them, went to the airport to meet them, liaised with local police services, made sure the family were kept up to date. And it's not a criticism of our consular services that they don't do that, although I know in some cases they do. It's the fact that my honourable friend for Glasgow North, the honourable gentleman for Strangford, all recognised this, that we should pay tribute, as did the Honourable Lady for Edinburgh West. We should pay tribute to consular staff, but the reality is they're doing their jobs with one hand tied behind their back. Partly because of Brexit, partly because of austerity, but they have been cut to the bone. And when I visited the embassy in Madrid a number of years ago to raise concerns, particularly on behalf of my constituent, Kirsty Maxwell, who was killed in Benidorm, I talked to the staff and to the ambassador about the proposals that we had in our report, and they could not have been more supportive, because they recognised that the human rights of our citizens were not being fully adhered to and supported, because they were not able to provide the service that they would like. And I think that that's a particularly important point to make. And we've heard of a number of cases of human rights abuses in this debate, and we must include Ala Ab El Fattah, the British-Egyptian dual national who was denied British consular support, Jimmy Lai, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, and of course Jack Singh Johal. And what the families of those people have gone through is unimaginable. So too the families of those who are killed abroad. And my honourable friend for Glasgow North mentioned Death Abroad, You're Not Alone. Dana, his constituent Julie Love, set that charity up after her son died abroad in suspicious circumstances. Eve Henderson set up Murdered Abroad when her husband was killed in France. The Kevin Bell Trust was set up for similar reasons, and the parents of Tom Channon, John and Kerry Channon, also set up a charity for awareness after their son died in Magaluf. And my constituents, Brian and Denise Curry, have campaigned relentlessly after their daughter was killed on holiday in Benidorm, and her newly then married husband, her and her husband had just been married, Adam, a few months before she died. It was an utterly tragic case. And my constituent, Julie Pearson, was also killed after a severe beating by her partner in Eilat in Israel. And despite the local authorities claiming she died of natural causes, we knew differently. And her aunt Deborah, who's my constituent, is one of the most formidable women that I've ever encountered. I dealt with those constituency cases early on in my parliamentary career. I did what all MPs do. I stood up, I asked questions, I pressed the Foreign Office, and I got nowhere, and I got no answers. And I knew that there must be more that could be done. And that's why we set up that all-party parliamentary group. And that's why we continue to campaign on that issue. Because families who have loved ones who either die abroad or are incarcerated or have their human rights violated need that support. And I think the Honourable Lady's bill is particularly interesting because it does have certain limitations on it. I would argue that if we had an absolute right to consular assistance and that assistance was provided early on, whatever those circumstances, then people's rights wouldn't be violated. It would ensure that people get the support that they need. And the reality is that since Brexit, there's a scramble for trade deals. Human rights are, in the eyes of some, going out the window and are being traded off against trade deals. And that, for me, is fundamentally unacceptable. And I recognise the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford's pride, in being British. I don't identify with it, but I understand it. But surely he and others understand that the positive notion of being British is being undermined, actually. The notion of a global Britain, when we are having our services and our institutions chipped away at, actually undermines the positive case for the British identity. And as my honourable friend says, and I couldn't agree more, that when Scotland is an independent nation, we will devise and develop an international diplomacy service that I would hope it would be called not a Foreign Office, but an international diplomacy service that will have consular affairs and consular assistance and human rights absolutely at its heart. Not because we just want to be different, but because it's the right thing to do. And the Honourable Lady's bill goes a very long way in establishing those principles. And I think that the contributions that people have made have been incredibly powerful. But how many more times are we going to have to stand up and represent constituents whose loved one has died in tragic circumstances, whose loved one is incarcerated somewhere, and they can't even get an officer there to support them, either because the officer doesn't have the ability or the support or the resource. I have no doubt, and particularly when we took evidence from those who were caught up in terrorist attacks, there was a recognition, actually, that there is a standard of service provided to our citizens. If their loved one is killed in a terrorist attack, they get a translation of documents, they get support for repatriation. So we know that the Foreign Office and the FCDO can do this. And the number of people who die abroad is 4,500 a year, UK citizens, but a very small fraction of them are in suspicious circumstances. And surely the very essence of being a proud nation, however you identify, is that you look after those who are most vulnerable or those who get into trouble. And the reality for so many families is that they have to fundraise to get their loved ones home, either because they didn't understand the nature of the insurance they were taking out, or the insurance wasn't adequate. And I have to plead with the Minister to really seriously consider the Honourable Lady's bill, but also to look very carefully at the resource that his own staff need, because taking a trauma-informed approach is absolutely crucial. So many times we've spoken to families who've been traumatised, and also to staff who have worked in consulates or who have dealt with traumatic situations. It's absolutely crucial. So I hope he will hear the cries from these benches across the House, and from members who have had to represent constituents who have got into terrible situations, because they deserve, at the very least, their human rights to be respected and their dignity to be respected.